Guardians, today we're covering 4 meta builds that every Warlock needs in their arsenal. These builds will offer you everything from outputting high boss DPS, ways to live out your dream of becoming the ultimate support player, and even ways to deal the most amount of weapon damage possible. Let's get into it. The first build on the list is all about dealing as much damage as possible with your weapons. With the exotic chest piece, Sanguine Alchemy, you automatically receive a ×4 weapon surge for your weapons, for any weapons that match your super, whenever you're in a rift or in a Well of Radiance. The amazing part about this is that damaging an enemy will mark them so that you deal an additional 10% more damage to them, and this 10% stacks with any and all buffs and debuffs. The even better part is that while you're in a rift, kills will extend or pause the timer of the rift, meaning you can get a maximum of 30 seconds out of one rift, which allows you to deal that increased damage for more time. And that's why I'm bringing the Healing Rift, paired with high recovery and utility kickstart to immediately get back a chunk of rift energy whenever we use it. We then also bring Facet of Hope so that we can consistently get back our rift at a 60% increased rate. The big part about this build is that it's tied to your super, so in my opinion, Song of Flame and Nova Bomb are your only 2 real options when you're on Prismatic. You could run a full solar loadout for this and run Well of Radiance, though I think it's better paired with Prismatic. And that mainly comes from 2 reasons. Number 1, we can transcend to deal 5% more weapon damage and easily get back our abilities. And number 2, we can swap to Nova Bomb or Song of Flame, depending on which you want for that scenario, which will give you a boost to either Void or Solar weapons, so you have more flexibility. If you don't have a teammate running Well of Radiance for DPS, then you can either swap to Solar and run Well of Radiance yourself, or have teammates that can alternate rifts with you. This means that with all of our buffs and debuffs, we can deal 158% more weapon damage in DPS phases, whereas most other classes can only realistically deal 129% more weapon damage. When going into a DPS phase, make sure to pre-pop your Transcendence and throw an Arcane Needle to proc Unravel for more damage and to proc Facet of Courage. Then pop your Rift and immediately pop your Song of Flame. That way you are now Radiant, Solar weapons will have Scorching Rounds, and you get your ×4 weapon surge from your Rift. Start going to town on the boss, and when your Rift runs out, pop another since you immediately get it back when you initially popped your super. Meanwhile, between your Solar Buddy and Scorching Rounds, you'll be causing ignitions for even more damage. And when it comes to improving the build, for stats, I shoot for 100 in Resilience and Recovery, and then I go for a mix of Discipline and Strength. Since my favorite setup is with Song of Flame, I really like to run Solar weapons with this build to get that weapon surge and Scorching Rounds. The Support Frame Auto Rifle is huge for healing allies and dealing even more weapon damage. Pair that with something like Dragon's Breath, Apex Predator, or Whisper of the Worm to deal a ton of boss damage. And as of Act 1, the artifact doesn't really apply to this build, so pick whichever perks you want. Sometimes all you want to do is shoot your weapon, and frankly, that's what this build is good for, dealing the most amount of damage with your weapons from a set location. And in the right scenario, this build really shines. Listen, I've heard you in the comment section saying it's harder to play Destiny on console than on a PC. And that's why I'm partnering with Apex Gaming PCs to bring you a lineup of custom built PCs that will elevate your gaming experience. Listen, I love on the couch console gaming just as much as the next guy. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to beautiful graphics and high frame rates, PC gaming is just chef's kiss. And with the Streamer Plus model, you'll have all the power you need to take on any new games that come out. You can use code LUCKY to save 10% at checkout. With that being said, let's jump right back into the video. The second build on the list is honestly one of my favorite builds and an easy go-to build. I like to call this my burst DPS build. We take a class exotic with Star Eater scales and pair that with the burst damage from Nova Bomb. While this specific interaction just received a nerf in Episode Revenant, it's still the highest DPS super that Warlocks have, allowing you to help melt bosses in raid and dungeon scenarios, and even obliterate champions in Nightfalls. Ideally, you want a class exotic with both Spirits of Inmost Light and Star Eater. That way you can spam your abilities. But even without Spirit of Inmost Light, this build is strong, and that's mainly because the aspect Feed the Void, allowing us to get an enhanced version of Devour, which fully heals you and gives you back up to 40% grenade energy per kill. That way you can spam those storm grenades. And And speaking of grenades, we can also bring Facet of Dominance so that your normal storm grenades will jolt targets, adding in more damage and AoE damage. And when you transcend, your prismatic grenades will also weaken targets. And now that we have a way to add in weaken, slow, and jolt from our grenades, we add in the Arcane Needle for unraveling, and the Aspect Helion to create a solar buddy that will scorch and ignite targets. That way we can fully take advantage from all classes debuffs. And what's the flow for this build? Well, in a normal ad clearing section, you want to use your melee or grenade to get a kill and proc Devour. That way any kills you get will start refunding your grenade. So spam that grenade anytime you get it back, using your weapons and class ability in between. And as for a DPS phase, I like to start by Phoenix diving before the phase starts to create a solar buddy. Then I throw a normal grenade to proc jolt and immediately transcend. Then throw a prismatic grenade and melee to proc the rest of your debuffs and immediately throw your Nova Bomb afterwards. That way you can get the most out of your Nova Bomb from your weakening grenade. And when it comes to improving the build for stats, I shoot for 100 in resilience and discipline, and then a mix of strength and intellect since both are pretty important for this build. And since this build is all about boss DPS, I like to bring my best DPS weapons. That could be Edge Transit with Envious Assassin and Bait and Switch, or the new Chill Inhibitor with Envious Arsenal and Bait and Switch. The important thing is to match your weapons to the boss that you're facing. As for the artifact, this season there aren't a ton of artifact perks that will be boosting this build, but you can take Conductive Cosmic Crystal. That way you can boost your Nova Bomb damage up to an additional 8% damage. You can then also bring Concussive Reload to weaken bosses if you are using a grenade launcher. This build is a prismatic masterpiece, allowing you to access 9 different class buffs and debuffs, high burst damage for bosses, immense ad clearing from ability spam, and even incredible healing from Devour. If you happen to get a class exotic with Star Eater scales, add this build to your arsenal. Hey you! Yeah, you! Are you enjoying the video? If so, remember to leave a like on the video and consider hitting that subscribe button. For the next build on the list, it's all about ad clearing and locking down areas, since we're taking the brand new Rhymecoat Raiment. This makes it so that your Bleak Watcher turrets are enhanced, offering them more range and generating stasis crystals around the turret. And while standing close to your turret, you start generating icicles over time, and these icicles will shoot with your weapon when you fire, which will apply slow and damage the targets that they hit. This means we are of course bringing Bleak Watcher to consume our grenade and create a turret. Since these turrets offer us so much benefit, we play into them as much as possible by bringing things like Feed the Void to gain Devour and in turn up to 40% grenade energy per kill, and then pair that with Facet of Balance to gain grenade energy on rapid darkness based kills to be able to throw as many turrets as possible. We then bring Facet of Ruin to increase the size and damage of Shatter, which pairs perfectly with a boosted Hail the Storm from this season's artifact to deal even more shatter damage. I top this all off with more survivability by bringing Song of Flame for either ad clearing or DPS phases, and then pair that with Facet of Purpose so that we gain restoration every time we pick up an Orb of Power. And what's the flow for this build? Well, the first thing you want to do is to get a kill with your Arcane Needle to guarantee Devour. Then you have two options: either use your turret offensively by throwing it at a boss or the area that enemies spawn. Alternatively, you can use your turret defensively by throwing it near your feet or an area you want to defend. Offensive can be great to deal some extra boss damage or even block off a group of enemies that you don't want to deal with. Defensively can be great for activities like Onslaught, where all the enemies will be funneling towards your ADU. Meanwhile, your turret will be freezing enemies and your stasis buddy will be slowing enemies that you shoot at. And when it comes to improving the build for stats, I shoot for 100 in resilience and discipline, and then I like to go for as much strength as possible. There are a few weapons that really help this build become even stronger. Once you get your hands on the new Chill Inhibitor with Envious Arsenal and Bait and Switch, you can pair that with a Stasis Primary to fully take advantage of your weapon surge. Icebreaker is a ton of fun, allowing you to cause ignitions by shattering enemies and crystals, which is really easy to do with this build. Otherwise, a Stasis Primary with Rhyme Stealer or a Solar Primary with Heal Clip is great for survivability. And for the artifact, we do have a couple that we want to bring. The most important perk is Hail the Storm, Storm, making it so that shattering crystals will send out ice shards, slowing nearby targets, but this also makes it so that all shatter damage will deal an additional 12% damage. And Brain Freeze is another great perk, which creates a slowing stasis field around frozen enemies, allowing you to slow and freeze even more enemies. And then I bring my grenade launcher perks like Rapid Impacts, so we gain increased reload speed for our grenade launchers, and Concussive Reload, so that you have an easy way to weaken bosses and deal an extra 15% more damage just by using your grenade launcher on them. This build is a ton of fun to use, and honestly, very strong. It's perfect for game modes like Onslaught, where you'll be in a set area for a longer period of time, allowing you to have more control over that area. And the final build we're looking at is still standing strong as one of, if not the best support build in Destiny 2. With the Exotic Helmet Speaker Sight, you can create a healing turret that will send out healing seekers every 3 seconds to any nearby allies, giving you cure and restoration. That way we have a way to consistently heal us and our team. And the really cool thing is, when you bring Touch of Flame, this amps up to restoration ×2. So you can then bring a support frame auto rifle to not only deal more DPS, but also when you apply restoration by healing a teammate, it will extend the restoration ×2 instead of just giving them restoration ×1. You can choose to bring Song of Flame for activities that require more ad clearing, or Well of Radiance for DPS scenarios like raids and dungeons, so that this build fits perfectly in whatever scenario you're going into. And we amp up this build even further by bringing Ember of Benevolence, so that every time we heal a teammate, we get 6 seconds of 400% increased ability regeneration for all of our abilities. And this means we get our healing grenade back before our turret even runs out, so we can immediately put down another. And I then bring the Aspect Helion paired with Ember of Ashes, so that we can put out a ton of extra damage and gives us an easy way to stun unstoppable champions by causing those ignitions. And what's the flow for this build? Well, you want to throw down a turret near where you and your team might post up. As you heal your teammates, your abilities will rapidly come back. And when it comes time to move, simply Phoenix Dive on a teammate or proc healing with a weapon that has a perk like Heal Clip or is a support frame auto rifle to keep up that Ember of Benevolence. Simply repeat the process whenever you come to a new location. But just remember that your turret, while it is see-through, is actually a solid object that can block your explosives. When it comes to improving the build for stats, I shoot for 100 in Resilience, Discipline, and Recovery, with Resilience and Discipline being the highest priority. For weapons, you have plenty of options to work with. You can bring any solar weapon that can roll with Heal Clip. That way you can proc Ember of Benevolence, or you can even bring the support frame auto rifle to increase your team's damage and add in more healing. This can be a bit of overkill, so any other weapon that fits the activity you're in will also do the job. And as of Act 1, the artifact doesn't really apply to this build, so pick whichever perks you like best. You can become the ultimate support player you always wanted to be by giving you and your team access to immense amount of healing and increased damage. This build excels in team content and even some of the most difficult activities like Grandmaster Nightfalls. And there you have it, Guardians. We've covered builds that excel at clearing out a ton of enemies, builds that are meant for boss DPS, and even builds that help you become the ultimate support player. But remember, mastering these builds is only the beginning. Experiment with different combinations and tweak your loadouts to suit your playstyle. If you found this video helpful or just enjoyed seeing a new perspective, feel free to like the video and comment down below what builds you've been enjoying most for Warlocks. Keep an eye out for future videos as we continue to explore the ever-evolving world of Destiny 2. Until then, may the threads of fate be ever in your favor. This is Lucky Mech, signing off. See you on the next adventure, Guardians.